Continue the profile on Theodore Roosevelt. We're going to tell you that after he was elected to his own term in 1904, 4 notable things were accomplished in the United States. And I think you probably heard of the first one. You ever heard of the Panama Canal? Okay, the Panama Canal occurred in the United States during the Roosevelt administration. What is the Panama Canal? Anybody know? I don't have a world map in here, but what does the Panama Canal allow you to go between?
North and South America.
Well, close. It's located between North and South America, but it's a passage where you can go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean without going all the way around. Okay, very important thing. So the Panama Canal. That's the first thing we'll talk about. Panama Canal. And what it did is, I'll tell you how the whole thing got to go here in just a minute. Okay, now at the time, the countries of Colombia and Panama were in a revolution. So when Roosevelt was elected president in 1904, the countries of Colombia and Panama were in a revolution. Now, what did Roosevelt have in the back of his mind? He wanted to put a canal through Panama, which would be a really big deal. So, as Brady mentioned, you could go straight from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean without going all the way around South America. So who do you think Roosevelt supported in this revolution between Panama and Colombia? Absolutely, he supported Panama. Because he knew that that country, if he helped them, would allow him to build that canal. So he sent American ships to aid Panama. Panama defeats Colombia in their little revolution between the two countries. And as a result, Roosevelt gets permission from the Panama government to build what we know today as the Panama Canal. Now this was kind of interesting because anytime you build anything, and some of you probably work construction a little bit, is a project like, say, the new, I don't know what this timeline is on the Bighorn Federal Bank, but I don't know if that's on time or behind, but 99.9% of the time, no project is ever finished by when they say it's going to be, okay? Well, the Panama Canal was not only finished sooner than it was said, it was lower, a little bit lower than the budget they set for. That never happens, okay? So they spent $360 million of that day's money and completed the Panama Canal in less time than they had anticipated. So it was ahead of schedule and basically on budget, maybe a little less at $360 million. So they began the Panama Canal construction after Panama defeats Colombia, in which we supported, we being the United States. It was completed sooner than anticipated and on budget, about $360 million. Now, it didn't open till after Roosevelt was president because it did take some time to build. But in his memoirs, he cited it as maybe the greatest accomplishment of his presidency, was getting the Panama Canal built. I think that's right. That's really, it was a big deal. That saved a lot for shipping, and people did not have to travel all the way around South America. They could go right through the Panama Canal. So there's the first thing that he accomplished during his presidency of great significance. Another thing that really sparked after he became president were national parks across the United States. National parks. Matter of fact, the number of national parks across the nation doubled during his presidency. Twice as many national parks after he was president than when he started. Now, he was really into conservation. Really into conservation. And probably the greatest act of conservation that he did during his presidency is he saved an island in Florida called Pelican Island. Okay? So his probably most notable act of conservation in this United States is when he went out of his way to save an island in Florida known as Pelican Island. And basically people viewed that island as swampland, worthless. But because of the number of birds, especially pelicans, that inhabited that island, Roosevelt declared a federal bird reserve. It was the first one in the nation at the time. So he goes out of his way They're going to do away with this Pelican Island. He says, even though you think it's worthless swampland, because of the inhabitant of the many different species of birds, including the pelican, he declared it a federal bird reserve, which was the first one in the nation at the time. Now, this action also began what we know today as the Fish and Wildlife Program, which in each state now is called Game and Fish. So, it's under national parks and conservation. So he began the Fish and Wildlife Program in the United States. Now each state has a game and fish department. Although it's weird, when I got here, Montana, they call it the Fish and Game. Here you call it the Game and Fish. I don't know why that is, but yeah. When I first heard that, I thought the person that said it to me wasn't real bright. Then everybody in Wyoming says game and fish, and if you go into Montana, they will every time say fish and game. Okay? But anyway, it was developed during his time. So national parks, okay? National parks. The third accomplishment was the advancement of the average American. Roosevelt had a great bond with the average American. He wasn't too thrilled with upper echelon people. He didn't really like the elite. Although, could he have been elite? He was born very rich. But he really had a great bond with average Americans. Now here was his philosophy. You don't have to write it down, but I do want you to listen, see what you think he's saying. He said, quote, "It is better for the working man to make enough money to support his family rather than a business making money for his company." So he was much more into the working man being able to afford to make enough money to support the family rather than the business getting rich off of those particular workers. Okay? So he was really for the average man. Now his administration became the first administration to give itself a name. And he called his administration the Square Deal. In other words, everybody's going to get a square deal. Now if you go through history, you don't have to write these down. Franklin Roosevelt called his administration the New Deal. Harry Truman, who followed him, called his the Fair Deal. Dwight Eisenhower called his administration modern republicanism. John F. Kennedy called his administration the New Frontier. Lyndon Johnson called his the Great Society. And names went on for several years, although presidents really don't name their administrations now like they used to. But Theodore Roosevelt became the first president to really name his administration. He referred to it as the Square Deal, where everybody, the average man, got a square deal. Yeah?
Do you think he was kind of a socialist in a way, or no?
No, not so much. I think he was wanting to make sure that the average person had an opportunity to survive, basically. Okay, now the fourth thing that came about was kind of interesting. It was a national symbol. Now, you know Roosevelt, you may know this, was an avid hunter, big-time hunter. And he always wanted to shoot a bear. He went bear hunting one time during his presidency. And during his hunt, he didn't see any bear. And his aides got all nervous, and the people that took him got all nervous, and they were getting frustrated because, you don't want to be the guy that takes him bear hunting. You don't even see anything, and he's getting frustrated. So finally, they're scouting around, and they find this old bear, just about dead, he's so old. They capture the bear, and they tie the bear to a tree and round up President Roosevelt and try to get him to shoot this bear because he had never shot a bear before. Well, he wouldn't do it. He said there's no sport in that, so he didn't shoot the bear. Well, several political cartoonists heard about the story. So they started making political cartoons about this story I just told you. And there was pictures of Teddy Roosevelt with the, cartoon bear, and it was kind of a good story that, he wouldn't shoot a bear that was not any sport. Well, finally, a toy manufacturer asked President Roosevelt for permission to make a stuffed animal in his honor. Thus, the teddy bear was born.
So
that's where it came from. Absolutely. There was no teddy bear. Kids had bears, I suppose, or stuffed animals, but it was Theodore Roosevelt that spurred what we know today as the teddy bear, which was absolutely named after Theodore Roosevelt because of this story that had gone around and the fact that political cartoonists had made kind of fun of him. And so the teddy bear is born. I think that's a great story. So we have the teddy bear because of Theodore Roosevelt. Otherwise, you just have a stuffed animal. Okay? I have my teddy bear. Still have it. I was born. It's at home. A little rocking chair. I wouldn't give it to any of my sons to give to their kids because I wanted to preserve the teddy bear. That bear is 58 years old. Just so you know. I'll bring him and show it to you. It's pretty neat. Now, we told you that Roosevelt was elected president in 1904, right? After he served the rest of McKinley's term. Well, he decided not to run for re-election in 1908. Instead, he threw his support behind his close friend, William Howard Taft, which is on your ID sheet. So, Roosevelt does not want to run for re-election in 1908. He served out the rest of McKinley's term, then was elected to his own term in 1904. He could have run for re-election in 1908. He chooses not to and throws his support behind his friend, William Howard Taft. Well, Taft goes on to win the election. Guess who he defeats? William Jennings Bryan. That poor guy lost 3 political elections in a row. Okay? So William Howard Taft, Republican candidate, wins the election of 1908, and he defeats again the Democratic candidate, William Jennings Bryan, who becomes a 3-time loser. Now, after leaving the presidency in March of 1909, because isn't that when they inaugurate the new person, he goes to Africa, sails to Africa to hunt, and he stays overseas more than a year hunting in Africa. Sails overseas after the presidency, goes to Africa and spends a year there hunting. Yes, dear? Well, we're gonna get to that. He's gonna try. So after leaving the presidency in March of 1909, he sails to Africa to hunt, stays there for more than a year. Now, during his hunt, he and his party shot 296 big game animals. 296, including 9 lions. So during that hunt, he shot 296 big game animals. Not just him, but he and his party, including 9 lions. And he brought specimens back because a lot of people in America hadn't seen these type of animals. And where did those specimens end up? And you can see them there today. Smithsonian Institution. Very good. So when my kids go to DC here in a couple of weeks, they want to run to the right museums, they can see some of these specimens that Roosevelt brought back from this year-long hunting trip. So it's kind of interesting, and Willa was alluding to this. When he got back home from his hunting trip, he found himself in the middle of national politics again. He didn't even know it. So he'd been gone a year, and he comes back, hasn't been paying a whole lot of attention because you don't have cell phones that you can call back and see what's going on. And some of the members of the Republican Party don't like Taft and what Taft has done during his years in office. So they turn back to Roosevelt and want him to run for the presidency in 1912. Well, Taft has enough support among the Republicans that Roosevelt isn't going to be able to beat him for the nomination, probably. So what do Roosevelt's supporters do? What? They create a new political party, which they call the Bull Moose Party, and they're going to nominate Theodore Roosevelt for president. So in the election of 1912, Roosevelt's going to run for the presidency again, not as a Republican, but as a member of this newly formed Bull Moose Party that were made up of his political supporters. How'd they come up with that name? Close. Well, he was interviewed when he got back, and a reporter asked him, how's your health? How you doing health-wise? And he said, I'm as strong as a bull moose. And that's where it came from. So he gets back, prior to this whole thing happening, a reporter talks to him, asking him about his year off in Africa, says, how you feeling, how's your health? And he tells the reporter, I feel as strong as a bull moose. So, this is a weird election, 1912, because there are going to be 4 candidates and 4 political parties in this election. Okay? Obviously, you're going to have the Bull Moose Party, who nominates Theodore Roosevelt. We know that. And we also know we're going to have the Republican Party, who's going to nominate President Taft. So we know we got the Republican Party and President Taft, and now this newly formed Bull Moose Party. Now you're going to have the Democratic Party candidate, right? And that's going to be Governor Woodrow Wilson of New Jersey. So the Democrats are going to nominate Governor Woodrow Wilson of New Jersey. And then we're going to have a new party called the Socialist Party. And they're going to nominate a fellow by the name of Eugene V. Debs. So what you're going to have in the election of 1914 is the Republican Party's candidate, President Taft, the Bull Moose Party's candidate, former President Theodore Roosevelt, the Democratic Party candidate, Governor Woodrow Wilson of New Jersey, and this new Socialist Party candidate, Eugene V. Debs. So, all of them are on the campaign trail, right? And on October 14th of 1912, Roosevelt's on the campaign tour. On October 14th of 1912, on October 14th of 1912, Roosevelt's on the campaign. And he's scheduled to give a speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Scheduled to give a speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on that date of October 14th, 1912. Well, as he's going to his speech, he's on kind of a parade, and he's standing in the back of a convertible, waving to people, getting ready to go give his speech. And a saloon keeper by the name of John N. Schrank tries to assassinate him as he stands in the back of that convertible. So on October 14th of 1912, during the campaign, Roosevelt was scheduled to give a speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Roosevelt's riding in the back of a convertible en route to his speech, and a saloon keeper by the name of John N. Schrank tries to assassinate Roosevelt. Well, Roosevelt's speech is 50 pages long. And that and his glasses case are in his pocket. Okay? 50-page speech in his glasses case. Well, when the guy tried to shoot Roosevelt as he stood in the back of his convertible, the 50-page speech in his glasses case deflected the bullet and saved his life. True story. A fellow by the name of Albert Martin, who is one of Roosevelt's aides and an ex-football player, tackled Schrank, wrestled him to the ground, and took his gun away from him. So right after the shooting, Albert Martin, one of Roosevelt's aides and an ex-football player, leaped on, tackled Schrank, wrestled him to the ground, and took his gun from him. As Roosevelt straightened himself up in the car after being shot, he says, I'm all right, I'm all right. And I told you that the bullet didn't kill him, saved his life, right? That didn't mean it didn't lodge in his chest. And since he wasn't coughing up blood, it was determined that the bullet hadn't reached his lung. And they urged him to go to the local hospital for treatment, but he refused. He said, just bandage it up and I'll get it taken care of later. I'm not kidding you. That's what he did. Okay? So the bullet lodges in his chest, but he concludes himself that he's not coughing up any blood, so the bullet couldn't have gotten to his lung. And all of his aides are urging him to go to the hospital for treatment, but he refuses. He just has his wound kind of bandaged up until later. Well, they bandage up his wound, and with the bullet still lodged in his chest, he gives a 90-minute speech with blood seeping onto his shirt. True story. And he got there late. He was late for his speech. He wasn't on time because he got shot. Okay? So, after his quick treatment and the bullet still lodged in his chest, Roosevelt prepares to address the crowd with a 90-minute speech, blood seeping into his shirt. So he gets there late, and this is the first thing he says. You have to write it down, but just listen. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." That's what he started his speech with. He gives a 90-minute speech with blood seeping from his wound. Well, as he's giving his speech, a heckler doesn't believe his story and kind of accuses him of lying during his speech. So he's angered by that, throws open his shirt and shows the crowd his bandaged wound with blood seeping into his shirt, and proceeds to give his speech. Well, after the speech, what does he do? Goes to the hospital and gets treated, and they probe it and look at it. They have new x-rays now, and they show that the bullet had lodged in Roosevelt's chest muscle and stuck in his chest muscle. And doctors concluded it would probably be more dangerous to try to remove it than leave it alone, so he lived the rest of his life with the bullet in his chest. Lived the rest of his life with the bullet in his chest.